We are wrapping up this morning our study through what are often called the writings. It's that section of books in the Bible, roughly in the middle of the Bible, that would include Job and Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and so forth. They're largely poetic in nature, wisdom-oriented, and we've gone through that and given some helpful ideas of how do you look into these things. I'm concluding this survey with a study of the Psalms 139. And as you study the book of Psalms, if you just read the book of Psalms, you just realize there's a wide variety in the way they're written and kind of the message they bring. One of the subgroupings of the Psalms is what Bible scholars call lament. And so that's what this particular psalm is. It's a lament psalm. And so I will unpack that word and that idea of what lament means and why it's so important we understand how to do it well. As a young believer, as a freshman at Kansas State University, someone introduced me to the book of Psalms. I didn't know what it was, but I quickly found myself falling in love with that book of the Bible, and to this day, it is one of my favorites. It's my go-to book. But in those early years, what I found myself doing is I would be reading along, looking for inspiration in the book of Psalms. And so I'd be reading 2 or 3 Psalms that day. And when I ran into one of these lament Psalms, I didn't know what to do with it because the very nature, the tone of these Psalms of lament is that they complain. That's the mark of these things. The whole psalm may complain or a part of it will complain, but I didn't know why there was all this griping in the book of Psalms that was supposed to inspire. It's a book of worship. And so what I tended to do was I'd read along, and then when I ran into one of these, I would just skip over it until I could find a psalm that was more inspiring. Or if I was reading through a psalm and there was this lament section, I would just skip over that until I found something that kind of gave me what I needed that day. But it was years before I began to understand why God inspired men to write lament and why he put it in his book and gave it to his people. And that's what I'm going to try to give you this morning, is some insight into what these are there for, so you can grow in your ability to lament well. So, let me give you some simple summary statements, some common themes that you'll find in these Psalms, which make up about 40% of the book of Psalms. They are marked by this idea of complaint. The authors are complaining about painful things, weaknesses they're dealing with, struggles they've got, dry times. There's a variety of things that you'll find them griping about. But that's a mark of these laments. They are very raw, stark, honest. And I'm going to use that word honest over and over and over again. These Psalms beckon us to be honest with God, honest with each other, honest with ourselves. One of the authors I read a few years ago who was unpacking this principle of lament told the account of he and his wife had tried for years to have a child, and they tried and tried. It just wasn't working, and they were losing children again and again and again. And then they had this, what they thought was going to be a pregnancy that kept. And so they went to the doctor to get the ultrasound, and when they did the test, the baby wasn't viable. And it crushed them, her in particular. And he writes how they were leaving the hospital and going out to the parking lot. And they got in the car. He said, "Honey, let's pray before we leave." And he heard this line roll off of her tongue as she prayed, "God, I know you're not mean. I know you're not mean. But right now, it feels like it." And he gave that story to say that is the essence of lament. Two things are going on when we're lamenting. One, we're honest about our pain and how it feels. We're not just explaining it and analyzing it. That may be a part of it. But we are feeling it. And we are honest with how we feel. At the same time, we are holding on to what we are certain of, we know is true about God. And we're doing that simultaneously. It's not like we have to wait until we get our life put back together and cleaned up after we go through a tough time, and then we can get back to worshiping. The lament shows us we do both at the same time, and that's authentic. We are able to be honest with God about what's hurting and confusing. At the same time, we're honest with Him about what we're certain is true about Him. Another characteristic of these, and I want you to, we won't dwell too much on this point, but I want you to hear this and lodge this away and use this. The lament psalms certainly have an individual benefit to them. In other words, they were written so you as a follower of Christ, I as a follower of Christ, can read these and meditate on these, and we can work through our difficult times. But they were not written primarily just for individual use. They were written so that the people of God had a language. They had a shared understanding of where is God in situations like this. And these psalms help these people work through painful things together. Families could work through these things together, and the Psalms help them do that. Congregations can work through difficult things, either that individuals are going through or that the whole church is going through. And they have a language. It develops a culture among them that produces resilient faith. People get through these difficult times together, and they come out on the other side of it better people. And these psalms help us to do that. Essentially, these psalms of lament help us to seek and to find God in darkness, in pain, in sorrow. And in a very real way, there's a difference between lament and grieving. There's a place for grieving, and we need to know how to grieve and to grieve well. But in a sense, anybody can grieve. You don't have to be a Christian to grieve. But the laments are uniquely spiritual. Because what the lament is calling us to do is that in our time of grieving, we seek and find God in the midst of that. There are other clues that if you understand what these things are and you come to one of these psalms, you start to look for these things and you'll see it. And these for me have become my favorite psalms now. But I have to stop and think about what I'm reading. This psalm, Psalm 139, is credited to David, so I'm assuming David did write it. There are at least 3 main points or areas of this psalm that we're going to look at, and they show us how David lamented in this particular situation. The first one, he's going to complain. The second one, I'm going to summarize with the word, oh. And I'll unpack that in just a moment. And the third one is what I'm going to explain with the word lean. And in short, what we'll see David showing us how he did this is in the midst of a difficult situation where it would have been very easy in his confusion to pull back from God. Because he knew how to lament, he was actually able to lean into God and seek God. So let's start with his complaint. King David knew how to complain. That was part of his spirituality. And so he complains about the mess he's in. And in this particular psalm, what he's complaining about is a group of people who he just calls the enemy. We don't know who they were. We don't know what they were doing to him. What we do know is it was whatever they were doing, it was enough for him to complain about, to go to God with this issue. And so I'm going to read verses 19 through 22. And I'll just read through this and just join me in this and see these things. I'm not going to go into a lot of explanation. I just want to give you enough that when you get home, you can go, okay, I'm going to look further into this myself. Verse 19, he says, "Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, men of bloodshed. For they speak against you wickedly, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They have become my enemies." I hope you picked up something here. Several things here. But one in particular, this is a very emotional experience for David. And the way he turns it into prayer is very emotional. He expresses strong feelings about this group of people, and he pleads with God to slay them and to get this over immediately. That's what David's asking for. I have to assume, though, the situation isn't changing very fast. In other words, he's praying, God, would you slay them, but they're still there. And there's going to be times, you've had these, I've certainly had them, where You ask God to do something and to do it now. And it didn't go away. It was still there. And you found yourself wondering, what is going on? And that's what's happening with David. You notice also he hates these people. He uses the word in the translation I'm using, I loathe these people. I've struggled with this. And I think David wrote these words to force us to struggle as well. Is hatred and loathing something that Christians are supposed to do? David leaves that unanswered, and that's one of the ways that the Lament Psalms there's a genius in these things. Instead of just simply answering questions so we don't have to think about it anymore, they raise questions so that now we have to wrestle with these things and go to God with these things and ultimately figure these things out for ourselves. Where is the place in the Christian journey where righteous indignation is the best thing we can do? Where's that point where it goes further than it should go and it turns into something that's not only injuring ourselves, it's injuring other people? 3 times the English Bible uses the simple word "oh." In this passage I just read, it uses the word "oh." David didn't have a word "oh" that he wrote in his Hebrew script of this. The words he did use and the grammar he used them with express emotion, strong emotion. And so English translators, when they're trying to pick up not only what was he saying, but what was the emotion he carried with what he was saying, they express that with this little English word. Say it with me. Oh. You know, you look up "oh" in the dictionary, it's there. But it's one of those, it's a phrase, not necessarily a word. We know what we mean when we say it, but it kind of defies definition. It can mean almost anything we want it to mean. There are sometimes it expresses ideas like groaning or exhaustion or insistence or pleading. And so it can mean that sort of a thing. In this psalm, it is used a few ways like that, but the primary way the word "oh" is used is to express an emotion of awe, wonder, quiet trust, like reclining on a strong arm. And that's the idea we're going to see again and again and again in the next area of lament that I'm going to be showing you. But I want to ask a question as we get into this, and I want you to just work with this. A few years ago, I taught on this idea of "oh." And I asked you the question, or those that were here years ago, I asked the question, how is your "oh"? And I'm asking you that this morning. How is your "oh"? Now, what I'm getting at is this. How's that part of your understanding of faith where you not only understand it with your mind, you can explain it, you can debate it, argue it, things like that. You kind of have your ideas of your theology is kind of figured out. But then there's a part of your theology that produces emotion. And the best way you know how to say it is, oh. And time again, we see this idea of David is lamenting by thinking out his understanding of God and is producing an emotion. And so he starts in verse 1, "O Lord." Don't skip over that word, "oh." He felt this. "Oh, Lord, thou hast searched me and known me." David's going to start the largest section of this psalm, and he's going to start unpacking what he knows about God. And there's numerous things he's certain of, but there's three he's going to concentrate in this psalm. But he not only knows these things with his mind, he knows these things with his emotions. In his simple outline, he's going to say, I know you know. I know you're here. And I know you're able. This mess I've got over here, when I think about you, I know you know about this, God. And I know you're here right now. And I know you're able to do what you're planning to do. So let me just read through these, and I'll highlight some things, but I'm going to leave it to you to go and take this in this psalm and other lament psalms and kind of discover and uncover these things yourself. Beginning in verse 1, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. I know you know, God. I know you know about my enemy. And you know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand what I'm thinking from afar. You scrutinize my path. Have you used that word lately? Scrutinize? I don't know if I use it very often, but when David thought about God, and as he thought about the mess he was in, he thought, God, you're scrutinizing this. In fact, verse 3, he says, you are intimately acquainted with all my ways. My enemy is hunting me down. They're trying to figure out where I am and where I'm going. But Lord, you know better than they know. And so I'm going to lean on your knowledge of my situation. Even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. In fact, you've enclosed me behind and before. When I get to a situation, you're already there. When I look back on things that I didn't understand, I realize you were there. David felt things when he thought about his enemy, but when he thought about God, he found himself saying, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's too high. This is beyond me. I can't attain to it. And then he shifts to, God, I not only know you know, but I know you're here right now. And so in verse 7, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? You know, fleeing what he did from his enemy. But when he thought about God, he thought, even if I try to flee from God, I can't do it. Because if I ascend to heaven, well, you're there already. If I descend into Sheol, heaven forbid, the place of the dead, you're there. If I take the wings of the dawn and go as far east as I can go, and for him that would have been into the Jordan wilderness, and it's dry and hot. Or if I go west, which would be to the Mediterranean, and dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there. Now this is interesting. As David thought about God, there was more than, well, when I get there, you're there too. You're not only there, but you're laying your hand on me, which is a metaphor. I mean, God doesn't have a hand, God's spirit, but when we think about God and describe God, we have to use words, and so we use metaphors to help us imagine what God is doing. He says, even there your hand will lay hold of me, and your right hand will guide me. And I take that to mean when David was so confused he didn't know what to do, it wasn't a matter, maybe God will guide me, it was God already is. In the midst of this miserable experience I've got right now, there's something else going on, and that is God himself is already working and guiding me. And then he shifts to another thing he's certain about God, and that is, I know you can. I mean, when he thinks about his enemy, he's wondering, am I going to be defeated by these people? Is this mess going to overwhelm me? But when he thought about God, he understood that God can do what he wants to do, and God is able to do more than I can imagine. The thing with David, as you read his Psalms and you kind of look at his life journey, when he was a young man, roughly 30 years old, he wrote Psalm 18. And there he had cried out to the Lord, like he's crying out to the Lord here. And he cried out to the Lord regarding his enemy. And the way David describes it in Psalm 18 is with ideas like this, that God came through for me. The earth shook and quaked, the mountains trembled, smoke came out of his nostrils, fire from his mouth devoured my enemies, hailstone and coals of fire. He sent from on high, and he delivered me. And David looked back on that, and there may have been a storm that came through, or he may have just been describing it in poetic terms, but whatever it was, God defeated the enemy. And it was marvelous and miraculous and magnificent. I, and I suppose many of you, would prefer if that's the way God worked most of the time. And he certainly had for David. But David is at a point in life where he's also aware of the fact that God may do that. I'd prefer if he did that, but frankly, right now he's not doing that. Does that mean he can't handle this? Or could it mean that not only can God work with the magnificent things and in magnificent ways, but God can work in molecular ways, microscopic ways, things I can't even see. And David's understanding of the omnipotence of God included both. And so he uses this metaphor, darkness, to kind of emphasize the fact, God, even when I can't see it, I trust you're already working for my good. So, beginning of verse 12, even the darkness is not dark to you. Even the night is as bright as day. Darkness and light are alike to you. You formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. You didn't need light in my mother's womb in order to put me together. I will give thanks to you. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well, and my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have formed my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me. Those days that even include my enemy. Thinking about these things, thinking about God in the midst of anguish, lament. He describes it in verse 17, how precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I should count them, they'd outnumber the sand. When I awake, I'm still with you. God, I know you know what I'm dealing with right now. I know you're here while I'm dealing with it, and I know you are able to work what is best in this situation. And so what he chooses to do as he laments, as he struggles with these two things, this miserable situation and this truth about God, and this cloudy spot in the middle where I'm not certain what to do and what you're doing, I choose to lean towards you by faith. And I'm going to trust what you're doing. And so in verses 23 and 24, that's what we see him doing. That's what lament ultimately does. It seeks God when it's not clear what's going on and what he's doing. It leans towards him instead of away from him. And so he says, and this is a prayer, search me, O God. Search is the word he started this psalm with, and now he's using it again. Search me, O God. He's been complaining about his enemy. I know he's been at times has certainly asked God, God, would you deal with my enemy? But now he's saying, God, would you deal with me? And God, not only would you deal with my circumstances, but God, would you deal with my heart? He says, try me and know my anxious thoughts. Sometimes God uses tough situations to show us what's really going on in our heart. I know in my case, that's how he brings things to the surface that I may have ignored or stuffed. But there's something about these difficult times that he just brings them up. And in David's case, he says, try me. And if you want to use my enemy to do it, try me. And know what I'm afraid of, what I'm worried about. And see if there is any hurtful way in me. Hurtful is an interesting phrase that he chooses here. I've always read it as hurtful in the sense of anything that's in me that's hurting me. And it certainly may have been what David had in mind. God, there's things in my life that are really injuring me, damaging me. And Lord, see if there's anything in me. The word hurtful may also have the idea of what am I doing to hurt other people? It's not just what's hurting me, but what's hurting other people. And what God may be doing is using the enemy and the hurtful way of the enemy and showing David, God, show me as I deal with my enemy, are there ways I'm just like the enemy? And I'm treating other people the way they treat me. God, see if there's any hurtful way in me and use my enemy to expose that if that's what you choose to do. And then, God, lead me. I know you've got your hand on me, and I know you lead me. Now lead me in the way that's everlasting. I take that as for the Christian, that's essentially to pray, God, use my painful situation and make me like Jesus. Produce the character of Christ in me and use my trials to do it. So, what do we take away from this psalm? Well, there's all sorts of things, but I'll just summarize it with these three. One, learn to be the kind of a Christian who is honest with God, who's honest with yourself, and if necessary, you're honest with somebody else as you process your struggle, your pain, weakness. Second, hold tightly to those truths in the midst of confusing, painful times. Hold tightly to those things you already know about God. And let them produce in you, that inner emotion that says, oh God. And be the kind of a Christian who leans toward God in your struggle. Invite him into your pain, your weakness, your struggle, and ask him, form the character of Christ in me. I'm going to close by praying for us. And I'm just going to use that invitation that Jesus gave in John 7:37 and 38, which is where we got the name for this church. But Jesus called out, he beckoned, he welcomes us. He calls us. When we're thirsty, which is essentially a difficult time. He says, in those times, I want you, I welcome you. And I'm just going to pray for us that we'll be people who lament well. And while I'm praying, Brent, if you want to bring the worship team to the front. But Lord Jesus, you taught us that when we are thirsty, when we're lamenting, you taught us to come to you. And so would you make us individuals, would you make us families, and would you make us a church that comes to you with our thirst, with our lament. And Lord, that we would drink. That in the midst of our pain, weakness, and struggle, we would drink and drink and drink deeply of the grace of God. And then out of that experience, Lord, would you work in the dark areas of our lives, the unseen areas of our lives, the molecular areas of our journey, and minister to us there. such that over time, out of our inward being would ultimately flow a river like the Amazon that's alive. And what we give to the world we live in is the love and life of Christ. Lord, teach us to lament well.